Hi, welcome to the Ellis Talker Show. I'm DV LeBron. Today, my very special guest is Mr. Matt Shelton with the organization Freed People. How are you doing, sir?
Man, I'm doing well. How are you doing, DB?
I'm good. So I met you and I found out what your organization's mission was. And I said, you know what? I got to have this guy on. So I bugged you and I didn't have to bug you much. So I really appreciate you coming on. But before we get into the organization, can you tell the people more about you?
Yeah, Matt Shelton. Man, I live here in Ellis County and I've got a family with 4 kids. And man, things are crazy right now at the house as we've got our youngest 13 years old and we've got them into college. We've got all the way up to college age. And so there's a little bit of everything going on in our world right now. But man, things are exciting in our house. And man, we're really excited about Freed People and what's going on here as well.
Man, so if there's one thing that most people, there's a lot of people who have no idea that the slave trade and child sex trafficking is huge in the United States. There's kids that are missing that were supposed, the migrant kids, they're somewhere in the US somewhere. Some of them, they've lost count of them. There's kids going missing every day that are popping up in places they should not be in. And people like you and freedpeople.org, you guys see that scrolling if you want to know more, go out there and chase and find these kids and these people. So tell me, what led you into that mission?
Yeah, so thanks for the question. A few years ago, back in 2021, I was leading an organization where we were doing counter-trafficking measures all across the world. So we had operations in 13 different countries, taking the fight and bringing justice and bringing freedom and just helping indigenous people do more with resources. And that was our focus abroad. And we got to see evil at its nth degree. But what you also get to experience within that is the overwhelming goodness of a good father through redemption. And man, we had a front row seat to really watch God do amazing things in heartbreaking, tragic, gut-wrenching stories. And whether we were in Uganda, whether we were in Southeast Asia, the Nepal-India border, Central America, right here on our Mexico border, trafficking looks different. And really, it was during that time where we were pursuing this. My wife and I were able to travel the world, just getting to speak with and meet different people, some kings and queens, and just really helping us get an understanding of what trafficking looked like in their country and attacking it strategically relative to what it looked like there. Man, we just had a real opportunity to do that for a number of years. But towards the end of that, DV, we just got a real strong conviction with what's going on here. And I'm probably not the only one in this conversation that gets the Amber Alerts and sees all this information going on. But man, I just really didn't have a lens to what it looked like here.
So you decided that you wanted to help around the world. That's pretty darn impressive. You said, okay, this is something that has to be addressed. So let me go all over the planet to do it. And now you want to come over here and start helping, and you've come over here and start helping against that. What you said, it looks different in every country. What does it look like here?
Yeah. So in 2021, when we really started getting this conviction as to what's going on here, we did a deep dive into it. I want to study it just like the next guy. And what we found are two things, right? Non-governmental organizations, which are NGOs in this space, are doing powerful things. But when you do a study for the mission that God put in our heart to locate and recover, who are locating and recovering these kids, you start seeing that they do a lot of amazing things. But what is typically within their impact zone, it's going to be in that restorative care piece. It's going to be in that redemptive space where there's a huge need, and I can't underscore the need of that enough. But again, we just had the lens of locate and recovery. When we were doing that study, what we found are NGOs are doing powerful things in this space. But what we found are the top 4 NGOs in this space brought in about $73 million in 2021, and it equated to 2,260 recoveries. And so we looked at that. We looked at what law enforcement's doing. Law enforcement is the tip of the spear in this fight. And what we find is they're under tremendous pressure. It's the world's fastest growing crime. And it's just, And not many people understand its impact here. And what you find is law enforcement is under tremendous pressure to locate and recover these kids, but the resources are minimal. And just what you find is they're understaffed and under-resourced. And what we found is, wow, what if someone could come alongside law enforcement and provide some of the due diligence that's required to locate and then work with law enforcement to recover. So that's how it started. But even that, and within that deep dive that we did, we found a lot of things that were earth-shattering to us, but we found one thing that just, after we read it, our minds blurred. And that was in 2017, the University of Texas released a study that said there's 79,000 children being sex trafficked at any given time in the state of Texas.
In the state of Texas.
In the state of Texas. And I'm just going to have to tell you, everything else blurred after I read that. And I'm not here to hang a hat on whether that number is right or wrong. But I can tell you whether it's one, whether it's 79,000, whether it's more than that, we're not going to wait around to see what the number is. Mm-hmm. There's a huge need for people to stand in the gap for kids who need us to stand in the gap. And that's what we want to do at Freed People. Our models, our organization is really modeled after Galatians 5:1. And Galatians 5:1 says we've been freed to free others. And I'm just going to have to tell you, our conviction as freed people myself, like, I've been freed to free others. And if we don't lead this fight, who's going to lead it?
Yeah. Yes. Wow. That number, even if it was one, it's staggering, but that number is staggering. That in just the state of Texas, and that all these highways lead out from Texas and they go to different places. But what is there an age range? Is there a certain profile to the victims that you're seeing, or it doesn't matter? What is, and I hate to use it like this, I've actually talked to a lot of sex offenders and it's the worst. But anyway, is there an age group? Is there what kind of profile you're seeing when you're out there chasing?
Yeah. So what we see is it's across every socioeconomic division there is. We've helped locate and recover children as starting at 9 years old and then all the way through adulthood. What we've been able to do so far is we've helped locate, I think we just got our numbers in the past couple of years, 304 children, 79 young adults, and we've helped law enforcement with 92 arrests for trafficking. And so what that has done is it's helped us get to know some of these children and some of these young adults. We've gotten to know their stories. And what we find is broken relationships are at the root of everything that we're talking about. And I'm just going to tell you, I don't care if it's the victim being trafficked. I don't care if it's the sex buyer, and I don't care if it's the seller. What we find is there's broken relationships at the root of everything that we're dealing with. We also find is the United States is responsible for creating more demand than anybody in this world. When you talk about our sexualized environment, when you talk about all the things going on that just didn't happen when I was a kid, it's just created a hotbed for demand. And that's what we see. We see that out of the 304 child recoveries, those children are our children. Over 95% of those kids are indigenous kids to us. And there's not you hear stories of the white van or zip tie on a door handle or all of these things that the people look for trafficking. But I'm going to tell you what it looks like is my daughter or your daughter has a bad day and it might be going through a rough season. And she starts putting out on her social media or any other thing that she has to face the world and says, I've had a rough day. My parents are so mean. I feel a little bit overweight today. And I'm going to tell you, there's people, if you think about collectively, this thing's a $150 billion problem across the world. So do you think there's a business model that's associated with that? There absolutely is. And there's predators out there with expertise to find that very thing. There's algorithms created to find that very, very message that says, I'm broken and I need some help. And there's people out there that manipulate that, and that's their business, is to find vulnerable people and exploit that vulnerability. And so what we find is most of the children we recover walk away from a family willingly under the guise of boyfriend or whatever it's going to be. And then once they get there, it's too late. because these guys are master manipulators. And what they've done is they've talked these children into, look, if you really want to come with me, you better leave your phone at the house. You better do this and you better do that. And there's standard operating procedures that these guys have that create a big challenge to locate and recover these kids. Yeah. So, man, just keeping our children, our community up to speed on what it really looks like here in the United States.
So social media, would you say that social media is the number one way that they recruit these kids, or there's just so many?
No, you bet. Social media is the number one. There's kids that age out of foster care. There's different vulnerabilities, but the lion's share of what we see is children who are being groomed out of a family. And typically there's some type of brokenness within that family. And then that child expresses that on social media. And then those expert manipulators come in and manipulate that. And over the course of weeks or months, talk that child into leaving.
When you're talking to their family, what is the number one thing their family tells you about what was leading up to that? Because you talked about broken, maybe an argument and stuff, but what is the one thing you always hear from parents?
We just never thought it happened to us. That's the number one thing we hear is, I just can't believe it's happening to us. A lot of times families don't even know the depth of the problem. And sometimes there's not a huge depth to the problem, but sometimes there's just a master manipulator on the other end that's taking advantage. But that's the most common thing that we hear is, I just can't believe this is happening to me. And I think oftentimes, and I'm guilty of it as well before we got into the space, is, man, this thing happens abroad. I don't see it here. It's never impacted my community. When we get out and share, if there's a room of 100 people, I would say probably 25 of them have been directly or indirectly impacted by it. But most of the people in that space, they've seen it their whole life, but they've never seen it their whole life. They've never actually had eyes to see it. My wife and I even have a story about when we started this, how that same thing happened to us, how we were able to see something that we've seen. I'm a native Texan, seen my whole life, but never really had the eyes to see.
Yeah, I understand that. I understand that concept. So it can happen in Midlothian or Waxahachie or even Red Oak. It doesn't matter that it's not LA or it's not San Antonio or Dallas.
That's right. That's right. Figueroa Street in LA is the most trafficked street in all of America. We have some of the most trafficked streets in all of America here in Dallas and Houston areas as well. And so Houston is the second most trafficked city, and Dallas is right up there as well. And I'm just going to tell you, you can go out there just about any time, any night, in some of those most trafficked areas, most trafficked streets, and see it. And it's just full of brokenness. It's full of women and some children out there selling themselves. And if you think about what trafficking is, if you take the emotion out of it, it's a commodity. And these girls aren't out on the streets selling themselves and keeping the money. There is a trafficker that's brought their commodity to market. And what that looks like is they bring them to the Harry Hines or the other streets that we're all aware of around the state of Texas, where they sell this commodity. And man, the buyers, they look like me and you. They can look like anybody you can imagine. And what you find is these girls, they have a quota every night, and they don't get to keep any of their money. And by the way, if they don't make their quota, it's probably going to be a pretty rough night for them. And they may not even be able to go to sleep that night. They may not be fed that night. And there's probably going to be some physical abuse that accompanies that. The way that we fight it is building relationship with women in the streets. It's creating an environment that's a holistic approach on how we work at it proactively, and then also in the lens of recovery, and then also through a lens of restoration. And so without getting into the weeds of it yet, that's our approach on how we look at things.
What is the profile of, because by the time they're on the streets, they're probably not in touch with the trafficker anymore. This is where they're at. And I could be wrong, but I'm guessing that the point A to point B, once they're at point B, point A, or that traveling point goes somewhere else. What is that trafficker? What do they look like? What is a profile of that person? Or it could be anybody or any.
Yeah, so there's a lot of gang-related selling of humans and child trafficking and adult trafficking. But what it's going to look like is what we see is children are lured into it either from being a runaway, then they get lured into it for obvious reasons, or they're lured right out of a family. But that trafficker is typically gang related in that street prostitution ring, to where they're manipulating, they're coercing all over social media to get them to come with whatever that gang socioeconomic look, feel, taste is. That's what it's going to look like. So you can imagine it looks different to different people, but there's commonalities in terms of capitalizing on broken relationships and vulnerability.
I know the evil of man. Unfortunately, I've seen so much of it, and I know you. What would you say is how can parents better protect their children from falling victim to this? Or what can parents do to just educate themselves?
Yeah. Typically, nearly all of the children that we've recovered don't have a good environment at the house. They've got a strained relationship with the mother, typically. Father's typically not around. You've got a child that's vulnerable. You've got a child that's looking to be loved. And so you've got opportunities for predators to exploit that. But for parents, just to let parents understand, man, when I can create an environment at my home that is a home where I'm loving these children, we have an open dialogue of communication. Social media is a powerful, great thing, but there's also ways that we can be exploited. Just having those open conversations are great things to do with your children. When you find something that they've done unknowingly, when you see things that come across their phone, have conversation about that, have dialogue about that, ask them questions, because what we see is children are perfect, vulnerable. Their vulnerability is perfect for master manipulator in this space, because if you think about even the way that their brains develop, they're not even thinking forward. They're not using reason like you and I would. And we still get taken advantage of from time to time. But can you imagine a child that's in a vulnerable state, in a vulnerable home, where love is tough, where if you're familiar with adverse childhood experiences, there's multiple ACEs within that home, it leaves that child vulnerable. And the more that we can mitigate that vulnerability at a home level, the less likely they're going to be caught up in trafficking.
But they could be caught victim. Education is key, I imagine. Now, take me through the process of when a kid goes missing and you get a call. How do you come into the equation? How do you even find this? Is it like somebody contacts you? How does that start? And without revealing sources and methods, how does that chase go?
Yeah, if it's okay, I'll just tell you how we got started, if that's all right.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yes. Back in 2021, when we had this desire to locate and recover, I resigned from the organization I was with, and we just started this with a mission that God had etched in our heart for locate and recovery. And man, we shared that with just about everybody. We knew some people in the space simply because of what I've been doing, but that led us to a conversation with a gentleman down in Houston, and we wanted to go down and meet him. So my wife and I jumped in the car to embed in Southwest Houston. At that time, Bissonnette Street was the second most trafficked street in all of America. So we were going to embed right off Bissonnette Street and just have a meeting there to see what it looked like, and then also embed to see what it looked like in this motel. And so I meet this guy, and we're talking at IHOP next door to this motel. Literally, within 20 minutes of talking to him, his phone goes off. His phone goes off, and he looks at me and my wife, and he said, "Are you ready?" I said, "Are we ready for what?" And he said, "We got a 15-year-old we've been looking for. Her phone just pinged 10 minutes from here. Her mom's right around the corner." And he got his counterpart to go do what he does in the parking lot. We did what we did in an adjacent parking lot. And when I say I had an eye to see it, he started showing me just everything in this little motel. And this is a Wednesday night. This isn't a Friday night. This isn't when everything's popping. This is a Wednesday night. And what we see is people walking in and walking out of this little motel. And he's just showing me the landscape. And he says, all those people walking in, walking out every 15 minutes or so, those are probably dope deals from that. I start to see that and have an eye to see it. Then he says, you see all those women and men walking in, walking out every hour. So he says, oh, those are human trafficking. And so you see that, and I'm like, man, I've seen that my whole life, but I've never seen it for what it is. And so as we're trying to locate this 15-year-old, he's helping us understand what it looks like. All of a sudden we get eyes on her. And within about 15 minutes, we had her out. We had her in our car. That's not typically how it's done, but mother had given us parental permission to go ahead and make that extraction. So when she came to us expecting that we were going to be her date for the night, which is tragic. She's a 15-year-old little girl. And I'll tell you, when I was sitting in that gas station parking lot near that motel, and she turned that corner, I'm just going to tell you, she looked just like my daughter. And she's 15 years old, looking at her cell phone as she walks up. And it's a tragedy beyond belief that she was in that predicament. And I got to know her story. And her story was this: 6 days prior, her parents were divorced. She had those adverse childhood experiences in her own home. And so it was time to go back with mom, and mom had a bunch of rules. She didn't want to go, so she ran away. And in 6 days, the streets found her, drugged her, raped her, threatened her whole family and her, and had her for sale at a motel 15 to 20 times a day. And so that's just one story of one child that we found within 15 minutes of being embedded in Southwest Houston. So my eyes were really opened up to that. And I asked this guy, I said, man, how do you do this? We're driving around in this old Expedition that makes 27 knocking noises every time you hit a bump. And he just said, what do you mean, how do I do it? I said, like, how do you fund what you do? He said, I live in a 900 square foot house, and my wife's a school teacher, and I have some side hustles that help me stay out here longer than as long as I can. And he said, at the end of the day, man, this is my cross to bear. This is my ministry. This is what I do. I said, what would happen if someone could come behind you and help you with some of those operational needs? Just like what we did internationally, right? Empowering Indigenous people with resources. And man, he starts to dream and talk and dream and talk. And finally, at the end, he said, man, I could rescue more children. And this guy's been doing this for 9 years and works with local, state, and federal law enforcement all the time, every day in this fight. And man, Freed People is really born in the streets of Houston of, you know what, man? If we can empower people already in the fight with better resources, better technology to do what they're already doing, let's do that. And so really that's how it was birthed. And what it's turned into over the last few years is what we've built up are outreach teams. And our outreach teams are in the streets every night. They're in the most dangerous places that you can imagine where this stuff is going on. But we're there to build relationship with women that are in the life. And even the adult ladies that we see, what we see is sometimes we're under the assumption that even the adults in this space are just figured that they want to make some money and turn some tricks. But what we find is even their victimization started when they were 3 or 4 or 5 years old, and they just kept having birthdays. And now that they've been in the life for so long, under the manipulation of someone, they don't know how to get out. And they're forced into that lifestyle. And so we want to be that safe exit option, man. When the physical abuse, the sexual abuse gets greater than that fear that they have of leaving, we want to be that safe phone call that where they can finally trust somebody, because they live in a world where you can't trust anybody. If you trust the wrong person, it could cost you everything. So we want to build that relationship with them over time. So that's what our outreach teams do. And our recovery teams primarily work with families and law enforcement in this fight. What started as a whole lot of families reaching out to us has turned into a whole lot of law enforcement partners reaching out to us, because you're not going to read about us in the paper. If everything works out perfect, what we've done is taken a lead from law enforcement and understand through technology, open source and closed source intelligence that helps us hone in on one location. We can go confirm with our eyes, yep, there she is. And then when we can coordinate with law enforcement to bring in their expertise in the recovery, man, that's a win. That's a win for law enforcement. That's a win for that child. And it's a win for us. So that's what our recovery teams do. And finally, we partner with restorative care teams. And when I say we partner with, we trust that to the professionals. But what we found in this space is we partner with restorative care partners that don't take money from the government. And so what we believe in this fight is the government was never intended to be a parent. The government was never intended to do some of these things that we were called to do. And so what we believe is, man, I'm just going to tell you, there was a lot of behavior modifications in Matt Shelton's life all growing up. But I'm going to tell you, when my heart changed, everything changed. And that's the same way we believe in these restorative care partners, man, with Jesus. Like when Jesus changes your heart, everything changes. My lens for everything changes. And that's the same way that we believe in our restorative care partners. So we partner with restorative care partners that have that same inside out model that changed me. And then we partner with them to take in these victims all the way through that restorative care process.
Wow. That is, wow. And that's one thing that I was going to ask you about too, is you're going into these dangerous environments, and I'm sure that the pimp doesn't want his commodity taken away. Does those situations arise where you end up having to flee or fight, or it's just one of those things where you hang around until that specific person and then go? How does that work out? Because I know those places are dangerous.
Yeah. So our outreach teams are there as ministry teams. And so they're just bringing love, God's love, to the traffickers, to the sex buyers, and to the victims being sold. And so we're not there to capture a commodity per se. What we want to do is build a relationship that allows safe opportunities to do that once someone's willing to get out of the life. Our recovery teams, typically we leave that face-to-face interaction to the experts who are law enforcement. And we leave that to them. And then there's other means and methods that we use, but that's typically best practice on how we pursue that.
Okay. Wow. And you're in Ellis County. How bad is the problem here? How bad is it here?
Yeah, getting a little bit in the weeds, man. There's some stuff going down in Harris County and the Houston area that's forced a lot of that, what was going on down there up here. I'm going to tell you, we've been part of recoveries. Our teams have been part of recoveries in all over Ellis County. That made the news. We see it there, but it's in every school district in America. That puts it in perspective. It's everywhere that children are. And that's one of the things we believe it's a community problem. And it's going to take a village to help see this to an end. But we just opened up a home very close to where we're talking today that we're really excited about. It's going to involve our community, and that's called Angel View.
I love that. I'm sorry, I'm at a little bit of a lack of words, and I'm never at a lack of words. It's a powerful subject. And how can people help you? How can people get involved in this mission of helping these children and these people?
Yeah. Pray, give, and go is what I say. We truly believe in the power of prayer. I'll just tell you one story. We had 2 children that we were looking for. We didn't have any intelligence on them for 24 hours. We gave those 2 names to our intercessory team, and within 24 hours, we had them both located. Within 48 hours, they were both recovered. So number one, we believe in the power of prayer. Secondly, just give. I'm going to tell you, no child. I just told you about Angel View. Angel View is a campus we just opened. It's a $4 million property that was donated to us for restorative care for children. And we're collaborating with another organization to operate that who are experts in this space. But here's the deal. Restorative care comes at a cost of typically anywhere from $100,000 to $250,000 a year. The complex trauma that these children go through is severe. And to get through that costs a lot of money. Here's what I'm going to tell you, man. When the body becomes a body and actually gets out there and does this stuff, when someone is so bold as to say, I'd love to donate this property, and then there's someone else out there that just needs that property to do that care, when you can connect all that, what we found now is we have this home. It's a $4 million property. I'm just going to tell you, it's the most amazing property you've ever seen. And it was a drug rehab for years. And now, so you think about that, it's got a full gym in it. It's got an indoor basketball court. It's got an outdoor volleyball court. It's got equine therapy to work through the trauma for these children. It's got 22 beds in it. We're going to bring in children straight out of crisis and work with those children to be new creations. And no child, no family will ever pay a penny for that. Every parent that we serve in this fight will never pay a penny for what we do, any of our services, because what we found is parents will mortgage everything that they own to find their child. And we consider it predatory for anyone to charge a penny to these families who are desperate to find their loved ones. So what your donations do is help offset that cost of our teams out there in the fight. It costs us on average about $2,800 per recovery. So that's a big piece of what we do. But I know you've put our website on there, it's freedpeople.org. We need recurring donors to help us continue this fight with some sustainability. But we also have a lot bigger vision. Over the past month, we've helped locate and recover women as far northeast as New York and women as far east as Nevada, west as Nevada. Our technology is growing to the point to where we can actually be a little bit larger force multiplier in this space for law enforcement. And it's simply through the donations of people like you and your listeners and things to that effect. We're very blessed to be underwritten by an organization that covers our cost of operations. So all of the money that comes in goes to the streets.
Wow. No, I hope that people, this is an organization here doing the work here to help people here and apparently all over the U.S. and then Matt all over the world at some point. This is the kind of organization, folks, that you want to be part of. And I hope that you will go to that website and consider donating to freed people. On my show, my guest usually has the last word, Matt. So I'm going to give you the mic and shut up and wrap it up.
No, man. I'll just say this then. I went to Israel some years ago, and my biggest takeaway from my trip to Israel was this. You go right outside of Jerusalem, you see the Sea of Galilee, you see the Dead Sea, and they're not very far apart. In fact, the same river supplies water for both of them. But what in the Sea of Galilee is a beautiful landscape. And if you're familiar with the Bible, all the stories that have happened in the Sea of Galilee. And it's just a beautiful, unbelievable experience. And then you go just a little bit downstream and you see the Dead Sea. And you understand there's no life in the sea to speak of. It's desert around there. And there's nothing alive that comes out of that. And my biggest takeaway from that trip was everything that flows into that Sea of Galilee flows out in tributaries that bring life to all its surrounding land and people. And everything, what I didn't realize, the Dead Sea is the deepest place in the entire earth. So everything that flows into there ends there. I'm going to tell you, we've been free to set other people free. Galatians 5:1, we've been free to free others. That's it. And there's a huge need for us to stand in the gap for our local children. And we would love nothing more than you guys to be part of our Free People team.
Yeah, I hope people will consider donating. God bless you, Matt, for what you do. I know this ain't easy. I know that there's many things that you probably could be doing with your life, but you're dedicating to help our most in need. And that is a beautiful thing. So God bless you for that. And I will be reaching out. We'll be talking some more. Can you hold on after the show?
You bet. And I just want to tell you, thank you for that, giving us a platform to share and express the need here in Ellis County and surrounding areas. And just can't tell you thank you enough.
No problem. You take care.